So today we welcome to the show Bob Peck. Bob is a filmmaker and author. He created, in my opinion, a really incredible documentary called The Kingdom Within. You can actually watch that for free now on YouTube. I really enjoyed it a lot. He also wrote a book a year ago and has been gaining, I think, even more popularity as time goes on. It's called Original Sin is a Lie. And as more people are beginning to evolve out of these more dogmatic, small understandings of religion, Christianity in particular, people are needing resources to help point them in the direction of the divine within them. And Bob does an incredible job of helping you see into the truth of who you are. He really shares the connections between many different spiritual paths. I love that he is a devotee of Christ, Krishna, the Buddha, and Paramahansa Yogananda. And he really ties a lot of these ideas together in his book into just one cohesive understanding of what it means to live and move and have your being in oneness with God. And as you'll hear in just a moment, we just jumped right into it. When Bob jumped on the call, I just immediately had to hit record because we just started riffing, and I'm like, yeah, the podcast started. So you'll enjoy this conversation, and I will say there's a cliffhanger at the end because one of the key things I really wanted to talk to Bob about, we didn't really get to cover in this episode. And that topic that we didn't get to talk about is the connection between Yogananda's interpretation of the New Testament and actual New Testament scholarship. How does that bridge together? Is this something that Yogananda is just sort of reading his own interpretation into, or is there some real validity to Yogananda's commentary on the New Testament? Because something I don't think I mentioned yet is Bob went to the University of Texas, studied religious studies, early Christian formation development, and really has a lot of wisdom about the early Christian years, the canonization of Scripture, and which really informed him as well to write his book, Original Sin is a Lie. So there will be a sequel to this episode to talk about some of those topics, but for today, I think you're really going to enjoy the multiplicity of things that we cover in this conversation. Without further ado, Bob Peck.
To share ideas when there's so much, misunderstanding, misinterpretation.
Yeah.
It's like, it's okay that it's niche, for me. It's like, I don't care because it's very interesting, and there's literally tens of millions of people that have never heard of the idea that I come not to bring peace but a sword is actually symbolic mystical instruction. It's like that's the bumper sticker on the veterans Tacoma. And and it's like, it's not quite what you think it is, my brother. But you know what it is, Luke.
Indeed. I've been initiated into the secret teachings of Master Yeshua.
Right.
But I think that's the thing, dude, is like you said, you're okay that it's niche. And that's taken me a little while to come around to, being pastor's kid and church planter and having that feeling within me that I wanted to do something big in the world. And then you go into this like esoteric hidden knowledge where Jesus is like, if you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't, And
Exactly.
That's a hard thing for, I think, a lot of people, man, who have come from like this very evangelistic push. Because this is kind of the opposite of that. But Jesus does that time and time again. If you don't eat my flesh and drink my blood, don't roll with me. And it's like, that's not a great ministry tactic.
That's so funny. And that's very courageous of you to be vulnerable about that, in terms of like wanting to kind of be bigger, get it out there more. It's for exactly who it's for. It's like, this is also for me to remind this. I'm sharing that with you, but I'm sharing that with me too, because it's like for my work, the past about a year, a book came out last September. I was doing TikToks basically beginning of last year is kind of when I started being public about this stuff, and very slow incremental growth, but very devoted people that really appreciate the work, and it's like, and because I've seen people explode, out of nowhere, and you're just like, oh wow. And and non-duality is just not that, um, compelling to most people. They're like, do I really want to know that this is all a dream? I don't know. What I really want is the nice car. What I really want, it's like, it's not quite the abundance circuit, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, to your point, it's like, yeah, you just want people that are really engaged with it. And really for me, I think the whole reason I'm really like doing this and committed to doing it, kind of here on out, is because of some messages I've got that are just unbelievable. People saying, I was very, you know, in the middle of the ocean, had no idea what to go, what to read, and your book helped point me. Your book is how I found Ramana Maharshi, or your book is how I found Zen Buddhism, or I've got a couple of those, and it's like, okay, I'll make 1,000 TikToks. It's like,
Yeah.
great. And, there's people that are looking for the life raft, and I'm not the life raft, to be
Totally.
clear.
Yeah.
but I have I'm a billboard. I'm happy to be a billboard.
Yeah. I mean, but that's kind of the thing is with your work is like, you're really giving people the things that enabled you to walk on this path. And I think that's all it is. Like whenever you get to that place in your journey where you're like, I'm just handing people the tools that help me like
Exactly.
carve the way, and you just become then, like every teacher talks about, just a vessel, just a conduit for something that transcends you, includes you, but goes beyond you. And but yeah, non-duality can be kind of a hard
Beautiful.
sell. But the thing is, man, like with that, and this is something I wanted to talk about specifically, is non-duality is a niche, but it has become this kind of like very buzzwordy thing in these niches. You know what I mean?
It has.
And it's like it has become its own, this is non-dual, that's dual. And it just sort of fucks the whole thing up of like, so I'm just kind of curious, like what you're seeing in that regard. And then really to back up even before that, we didn't really like properly start, but does anything ever properly start in the universe? It all is. But like your movement into a non-dual awareness, but you've had this affinity for like Christianity and learning about its origins, going to school, college for this. Like, I want to learn a little bit more about your Christian formation and how that then became, to use another popular buzzword, deconstructed, and how you moved into the non-dual space. And then this is kind of a loaded question, so we can break it down, but how you still see some of the stains, I don't know if that's a good word or not, but the stains of where we've been that continue to trickle over into whatever sort of new awareness that we think we're walking into. We still hold dogmatism to some degree,
Sure.
And especially in the non-dual space, it's like, no, that's not real Zen Buddhism. This, and it's like, we might as well just be scribes and Pharisees, and I don't know. I've found some people I follow being quite dogmatic in this space. So long-winded thing, but bring me like formation and then into the deconstruction season, and then I'm just gonna let you roll.
Yeah, no, that's those are all great questions, and thanks for the context, and I'm happy to share. I also want to learn about you and your background as a pastor and a Passions kid, because I think that's super interesting to like come into this space from that background. So we'll get there too, but I think the first thing I'd say is there's a really, really great about non-duality. Before I share some of my story, there's a really great article, and I'm promising that I'm going to do some videos on it, some work on it. It's from the 2000s on the internet. It's one of those ancient blog posts. It's called, basically, if you search Advaita and neo-advaita, and the author is Timothy Conway. Highly recommend. I've storied about it. I'm going to do more work on it, but really in the 90s and 2000s, this term emerged called neo-advaita, which is kind of it's kind of what we're doing, Luke. It's basically white dudes in America talking about Advaita Vedanta, and which which I've done, and then I've read I Am That, and I've read
but we don't have Indian
Ramana
names
Maharshi.
yet, so.
Right. That's a whole other issue. But yeah, Tim Conway really breaks it down in terms of these teachers that were, using the kind of quotable quotes of Sri Ramana, like "just be still," or Nisargadatta and Sri Ramana. What's really beautiful about them, these mid-century Indian masters of Advaita is called the jewel of Indian philosophy. They are they're very brutal. I mean, they're brutally honest about. I mean, Nisargadatta has a quote. I'll find it where he says, like, "I'm dead already." Like, what's the transitory is already gone. Don't you understand? I mean, it's almost patronizing how their level of awareness. But what Tim Conway explains is the traditional or kind of real Advaita, quote unquote, what it has that neo-Advaita, kind of new Advaita, doesn't have is that Advaita Vedanta in India is rooted in a foundation on ethics and even heart-centric practices. So there's a level of morality and ethical service, sadhanas that one does before you're entering into this realm of kind of intellectualized spirituality, which the neo-Advaitans, they're almost combative with people, or they're patronizing with people. Kind of some of these big teachers in America, they'll have someone up on stage and just say, "Don't you realize that we're here, that this is it?" And they have this, some of them, I'm not going to name it. I think he points out a couple examples, but anyway, highly recommend Tim Conway on a more detailed distinction between Advaita and kind of neo-Advaita, the right way to look at the illusion philosophies and kind of the modern issues. But yeah, that said, I mean, I've kind of always been into this stuff. One of my mom's friends asked her last year about, like, "Oh, your son wrote a book on religion. Like, what's that all about?" And she said, when all the other little kids were reading Harry Potter, Bob was reading Thich Nhat Hanh. That's true. I really was. I read Living Buddha, Living Christ in like 7th grade or something like that. And
really?
Yeah,
dude, great
it's
book.
Amazing. And I so enjoyed the East pretty early. I read Yogananda in college. And so I was entranced by these guys because very broadly, I know your audience is aware of this, but very broadly, the East tends to be more inclusive. That's not the case for all Eastern paths or teachers, right? But just, the broad swath of it is all paths are valid, and all teachers have their own flavor or their own version of the truth, kind of based on where you are. And I felt the inherent, intuitive, honest truth of that a long time ago. And meanwhile, I grew up in Texas. I'm in Austin now, which is very open-minded and very SoCal. Shout out to my Pacific Coast brothers. But
well, everybody's rolling over that way, man.
You guys are coming here to Austin. Yeah, which is great. Come on in.
I'm glad that you think that, man. I do some insurance work too. That's the boring side of my life. But I just did a policy for somebody in Austin. And they're like, "You guys need to stop moving here." She had this whole thing.
Well, she moved here 5 years ago, probably. So
I said, "Where did you come from?" She said, "Pasadena."
Exactly.
I'm like,
Mirrorland,
man.
See how it's Mirrorland?
Yeah. That's it. Funny. So with that, like, what's really curious to me, and maybe just because I'm, PK or whatever, in 7th grade, if I brought a Thich Nhat Hanh book home or Harry Potter book home, I would have been in trouble.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So, like, as a matter of fact, on the Harry Potter thing,
well, that was
my teacher. I was in 4th grade. That was
devilish, actually, to some folks, right?
Well, yeah, it's black magic, man, and you're dealing, spiritual warfare, whatever. I remember in 4th grade, they wanted to read that's whenever it came out for me, the Sorcerer's Stone or whatever, and they had to send a permission slip home. And the only other girl in my class, her dad was on staff at my dad's church, So we had to go out in the hallway and sit in the hallway while they read Harry Potter. But it was this whole thing where like I got my first Bible given to me at that time. And, you know, my dad was so proud because I chose the way of light instead of darkness and this, that, and third, whatever.
Yeah.
So your parents are clearly cool with all of this. And you're in Texas and you're reading Thich Nhat Hanh and
I know,
exploring
it's bizarre.
spirituality.
And you're prevented from reading Harry Potter in California. What a bizarre mix-up.
I was in Indiana.
You're in Indiana,
actually.
Okay.
I was in the Midwest.
That makes more sense. So
Indiana, more sense for sure. I mean, I did a recent like deconstruction story. Like I didn't have a super strict upbringing, you know, but like in contrast to some of the others. But like for you, like whenever I hear someone who's written a book like yours, which I'll do an intro for this later, but so people would already know about it. But Original Sin is a Lie. You've done this. The Kingdom of Heaven is Within You. All this stuff, right? Like I would think whenever I first saw your work, I'm like, oh, this is a guy who probably grew up in a conservative household and broke away from that and potentially has an estranged relationship with his parents. And then I saw a reel where you're like, my parents have been seekers and they've been open, and I'm reading Buddhist books in 7th grade. I'm like, what the fuck's this, man?
Yeah.
So break that down
it's
to
confusing,
me a little bit.
I know. It's actually I went on another podcast and she goes, oh, so your dad did the work for you. I was like, oh, I haven't thought about it like that. He kind of has that Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 narrative in terms of he grew up altar boy in Dallas, Texas, Catholic church, Catholic school. He's a very strong-willed person. I'm much more kind of open tree hugger than him. My dad and I have a great relationship, but we're very different. And he kind of left the Catholic Church very dramatically, and to the lamentation of his parents, and became a militant atheist. He was an argue with you atheist, kind of in his 20s and 30s. And then he met a woman. My parents got divorced when I was a baby, and they're still cool. It's all good. I'm normal. And he relatively, and he met this woman who was basically she was a massage therapist. She was a Reiki master. She used essential oil. This is in like 1992 in Texas. So she was like way ahead of her time, into kind of new age and mystic spirituality. And he just had all these experiences. He basically got really into meditation, started reading these books, and started having synchronistic moments, right? Which is that the Carl Jung term for glitches in the matrix, right? And I know you're familiar, but just for your audience, whenever you have moments that are kind of unexplainable or cosmic connections, if you will, there's no going back, And so that was his Act 3. And that was when I was a little kid. So he was kind of coming into this when I was a young boy. And and my mom is an Easter Christmas Christian. Her family is from East Texas, but they're very open and just sweet, mild mannered. We went to church twice a year. I kind of had them for the community exposure, but nothing too crazy. And then my dad, meanwhile, was reading A Course in Miracles, and I think he read Autobiography of a Yogi when we went on some ski trip, and he's like, this is pretty good. And now that guy's on my wall,
so cool.
So I'm really grateful, for him to kind of pass the torch to me in a sense. And then I just really got into this stuff. So I went to school for it. I have a bachelor's. I don't have a master's, so that was a limiting belief for a while, was like, I don't have a graduate degree in theology or divinity or whatever, but I do have a religious studies degree in bachelor. Anyway. I know. Corey Allen, who's a pretty big guy on Instagram, if you know, I talked to him a few times, and he goes, I was about to put the book out, and I said, I only have a bachelor's, and he goes, Bob, let me just stop you real quick. He goes, I didn't go to college, so just drop that, will you? And it's like, okay, thanks, man. He has 1 million followers or whatever, about his writing.
Dude, he's awesome.
So he's great. He's a sweet guy. So yeah. So anyway, limiting belief. But I studied, I think I took about 4 classes on Jesus, 2 on Paul, 2 on the Apocrypha, and really, kind of to bring it back to the book, what I found very clearly in Bible scholarship, it's like, it's not a conspiracy, is that these are extremely human documents. they do have very legitimate ethical teachings in them, which is why they have value and they're still around 2,000 years later. However, there's distinctions, there's discrepancies, there's even contradictions. They're not massive contradictions. I think some of the atheist accusations are not quite honest in some ways, but the infallibility camp in Christianity is just factually incorrect. I mean, just there's no way that you can reconcile the differences of the portrayals of the Gospels, for example. So I just said, man, this is really compelling to kind of have this information. And then going into, Yogananda, I think you were talking about it recently, the second coming of Christ, the resurrection within you. Yogananda wrote this commentary on the Bible, Thich Nhat Hanh, Living Buddha, Living Christ. When you read the mystics' take on the Bible, that opens it up. So what I'm trying to do is say, here's the scholarship of it, and here's the mystical interpretation of it. And it's kind of the yin and yang of those two have been really profound for me and helpful.
Well, something that's interesting about that to me, and this is what I want to, really get some honest where your head was at, because whenever you're in Texas, you're influenced clearly, and that's what I argue with people all the time about, not really argue, but I advocate for, is that everyone has a relationship with Jesus in America. And even if you're an atheist, I mean, it's everywhere. Right. It's aware.
He's omniscient.
Yes. I mean, you could be anywhere in America, the most secular city, and say Jesus, and there's images, there's narrative, if you say Krishna, I don't know, like they don't have an awareness for that. So everyone has a relationship with Jesus in America, period. And so that's been my revisiting work to ministry, is helping people understand the non-dual nature of Christ and his wisdom teachings. But what I'm curious about is a college student who is clearly influenced in some degree or another by the avatar of Jesus. We wouldn't have language for that probably as teens, but you're exposed to Buddhism, you're exposed to Hinduism through Yogananda, but you chose to press into Jesus, where a lot of people, because Christianity is so familiar in America, they would want to go to the more exotic. You were presented with the exotic and went the more I watched your documentary, The Kingdom of Heaven, I'm just botching the name, but The Kingdom Within. The Kingdom of Heaven is within you, whatever. But it was great. I want to chat about that in a little bit too. But my judgmental self, as I see these pastors you're talking to, and I'm like, if I were to pick who to hang out with, from the people that were on one side or the other, I would hang out with the yogis. Even whenever I was a teen, probably I'd be like, these guys are nerds. But you chose to go the path of learning the nerds' understanding. Why?
Yeah, man, it's a great question. Thanks for asking that. That's probably
derogatory to me.
No, it's true. Well,
that are whatever. But
what's funny about that film was I think I started with about 12 interviews, and they were all pro unity. And then I was at a party and I was talking about the films, and this guy was brutally honest with me. He was just an acquaintance, but he was in production, and he goes, it's all people that agree with you. He's like, you need to find some crazy pastors. You need to find somebody that is off the wall, or I'm not going to watch it. I mean, it was very just slapped me in the face with that. And I was like, oh shit. Okay, man. And so I did. I found 3, I emailed 20, and I got 3 pastors who are like, yeah, I'll talk to you, and one of them is super firebrand. I'm thrilled he's in the film. He's the guy with the white hair in the white background, and he says stuff that's almost Westboro Baptist churchy. But then there's 2 other guys that are kind of more middle of the road conservative fundamentalist who say some night, they're like, well, but then everybody else is like, it's all one. Can't you understand? And then my pastor actually is in it. So for me, when I was a little kid in East Texas in Beaumont, my family's from this town on the border of Louisiana and Texas called Beaumont. It's a pretty awful place. No, sorry, Beaumonters. No offense. The food's great. but it's pretty uninteresting
I don't know
town.
if I have any listeners in Louisiana, new demographics.
Sorry, Beaumont, Texans. I know. Yeah, I love y'all,
Or
but
East
I'm not going
Texas.
back. That's so mean. Austin's better. But anyway, my pastor in that town was amazing. His name's Father Patrick Gahan, and he was just charismatic and just humble, and like he would make you laugh and like make you fucking cry. Like he was just incredibly gifted orator and just warm, just all the positive characteristics of like a true Christian preacher. And so that he baptized me Episcopal when I was a little kid, and then when I moved to Austin when I was about 10, and then he moved up to Wimberley, which is near Austin, kind of randomly. And so when I think my mom or something told me that, and so I went and filmed him. So he's in the film, and he's amazing. And his testimony, he says something like, which I quote in the book. He says something like, "I don't know many mature Christians who discount God's other holy messengers." He's like, I know mine, and he's transformed my life, but I'm not. That's arrogant to suggest that there's not other. I mean, it's beautiful, and to have a Texas preacher say stuff like that. So I was exposed to him,
rare.
and very rare. And he tells, for example, the story of the parable of the Good Samaritan, which touches my heart. The parable of the prodigal son are my kind of two faves that I have in that film and in my book, and I really dig the Galilean. He's really, really great, and it's like I learned that the real guy's cool, and everybody doesn't. Our generation, whatever, is not into this false version of him. So it's like it's a real honor for me to try to get across kind of the real version, the truer version. And then somebody in my comments, some Christians said like, well, this is the gospel of Bob, whatever. So anyway, I'm always going to get critics.
And Paul has his own gospel too. He says, this is my gospel,
right.
like
I mean,
it's everybody's
imperfect transmission, but he's really great. And
I'm
Yogananda,
working,
like you said, use the word avatar. Yogananda considers him an avatar. This is one of the highest humans of all human civilization. So I'm happy to share his wisdom.
Well, you apparently dug him so much that you spent a bunch of money and 4 years of your life to devote yourself to
still paying it, to be honest.
His teachings. And so and that's what I'm wanting to like see is like what would like you knew that you weren't going to like be a pastor. You know what I mean? People that spend money in that 4 years of their life doing that, they either, want to be a pastor or whatever, or they're like training to be a Bible teacher at a seminary or something, So it's like you and Bart Ehrman are like the only people on planet Earth, it's like, that learned this shit to basically like debunk evangelicals, you know what I mean? But really, though,
I appreciate that. There's a few of us, but you're right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more. I'm just being, whatever. So I'm curious.
I appreciate the compliment.
When you, yeah, man, yeah, for sure. Like you're making this decision to go study. Were you a part of like a church? Did you have like a young adults group that you were a part of that you were able to go slam dunk on people, or
No.
like what was Bob's life like that made him interested again in these very sort of like familiar narratives?
I remember I write about this in my book, which is I went to vacation Bible school with a friend when I was really young. I would go to those in East Texas again. My pastor was great, and our church was very like open and stuff. But when you're a little kid, as we all remember, when you would stay the night at your friend's house on Saturday night in Texas, Sunday morning you wake up and you got to go to church with them. So it wasn't my family church, but I went to a hardcore Baptist church with my friend, several times. And I remember being a little kid and just be like, this is extremely different vibrations. And, a little old lady came up to me and said, do you want eternal life? Because if you do, literally, it was like sign your name at this thing that says Jesus is Lord and Savior. It's like that's all you got to do, you know. And I was like 8,
Yeah.
and I remember being like, this is not true.
Yeah.
Like I just, you know, so there's moments like that, and just, you know, seeing folks go to church. And I actually did go to a youth group to go see Passion in high school. It was like a big youth. Some of my friends were in it, so I like went with them to go see it. And I remember being like, pretty big focus on the blood here, you know. So I've always kind of been, I don't know. It's just nothing too dramatic. I think what's funny about what you said earlier is like, I think you're right. I think that happens to people who kind of stumble on my work. They're like, oh, this guy must have had a fucking hell of an exit. And I really didn't, you know. I really, I'm grateful that I didn't, you know. I honor people that have had those, and some of them, you know, our buddy Daniel left the worship band, you know, he was the cool guitarist. There's a group of guys, and now you're a part of them, but there's a fun kind of group of guys and gals that I've been kind of collaborating with. And this other guy, Cub, he was the AV guy at church, you know, and then he started talking about the Buddha. And the new pastor fired him, you know, and so now he does a podcast of his AV genius on mysticism with 3 broadcasts live and all this. You know, it's like he's the AV guy that's like the 2.0, and now he's into mystic, you know, but he was the church, you know, AV team. And so I've seen a lot of folks that had those exits, and I honor that. But yeah, it missed me for some reason. And that's perhaps why, I mean, to the larger point here, why I still am into it, because I didn't lose, you know, the bad taste in my mouth. I mean, I've had comments on my stuff where people say, I never want to hear the word Bible again, you know, and I'm like, oof, I honor that. And I'm sorry that you had it shoved down your throat for, you know, a decade or two, because that resistance comes from real trauma and indoctrination. So, you know, I get it, you know, then go read Thich Nhat Hanh for 20 years, you know, or Rumi or something, you know. You don't need the Bible. But it's my role is to just say, hey, there's some gems in there. It's not perfect, but, you know, don't throw out the baby with the bath. The baby's beautiful. The bath water is filthy, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's what's good about like your story and stuff too, is because there is there's a lot less of the emotional damage that's had to be sorted out, so that you can approach it from a much more, just like you're saying, like you're approaching it from a scholarly perspective, but an experiential perspective, and able to hold that tension really well, where a lot of people, you know, it is emotionally fueled. And I'll admit, for me, in the earlier years of doing this stuff, I started Spiritual Nomad as a project in January 2017. So it's like been an intermittent thing, whatever. Oh, nice. And the early stuff is very much emotionally fueled, and but also just curious, you know, like trying to sort through things, whatever. But what I appreciate about you and your work is you're able to do it with a level head, if you will, like, you know, and not get too wrapped up into all of it, you know.
Thanks, man. It seems like there's a punk rock period for most people, right? Of like that exit, you're just kind of like, screw all of it. It's all BS, and how dare they, you know? And that seems to be necessary and useful for most people. But then there's a softening, and then there's a, you know, you eat a mushroom, and everybody's like, wait a second,
like,
love your enemies.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was part of my thing too. I'd already come to sort of the mystic path and oneness, and then, you know, psilocybin just confirmed that in 2020. But
does it ever?
I think that, like, oh gosh, yeah, dude. I mean, that's like everything that beyond word, all the stuff that everybody talks about, like this love beyond words, this awareness beyond conception, you know, from your own mind, like it just confirms all of that stuff, you know, and it's incredible. But a lot of people are so scared of that, and a lot of people then too kind of discount. And I've not really talked about it too publicly, because coming from the church world, I'm aware that people will almost immediately then like discredit you as invalid because of moral things that you choose that don't fall in line with their value set, you know?
Yeah. And thankfully
so, I
that
don't know, I've been
taboo's
more
going
bold.
away. The taboo is going away,
Yeah,
thankfully,
totally.
because of the legalities and because of the research. But you're right. It's been unfortunate.
Absolutely, dude.
It's been unfortunate, you know. And by the way, just fun asterisk, it's not the gateway to heaven. It's not the key that unlocks all the mysteries. The
Right.
key that unlocks the mysteries is right here in your heart. That's the
Yes,
only
dude.
place. But psilocybin and a couple others can be useful tools. As you know, that's kind of how I try
Yeah.
to describe it. They can give you a glimpse.
And if you just remember that they're tools.
Yeah.
Because people, I mean, and not to get too Old Testament on us here, but we just create idols out of
Right.
everything.
True.
And I've been frustrated about speaking about psychedelics because it's become such an idol thing
Mhm.
where this is the thing. And the minute that you think that you found the silver bullet, it disappears.
Yeah.
Because there is no silver bullet out here.
Exactly.
Silver bullets from within you.
Beautiful.
And there are things that help excavate that truth, but there's nothing that you can input. And it's what comes out of a person that defiles them. Or, you know what I mean? It's not what goes into you. So
You're here.
helpful tool, but people, they get the, they mix up the stream for the source a lot of times in this day and age, in my opinion. So
You're here. Yeah. And
I don't know what to do about that.
Set and setting, you know, yeah, if anyone's interested in more research on that, Michael Pollan is really, he's a New York Times journalist. He wrote How to Change Your Mind, which helped with the taboo big time, actually. 2018. I was at a bar with some coworkers, and I've been a psychedelic supporter for a long time. And put it that way. I'm tripping right now. No, I'm just kidding. But I was at a bar with coworkers. I'm in tech, and you know, they're straighter, and I'm the kind of the mystic in the machine. And I'm at the bar, and this guy goes, somehow psychedelics came up, and he goes, "Oh, have you read Michael Pollan?" And I was like, "No," at the time. You know, so he's the guy who helped folks that had never read Be Here Now.
Yeah.
You know, they read Michael Pollan. So anyway,
Right, yeah.
He's great. And I cite him in my book. I got
that book in the mail.
Psychedelics.
Oh yeah, that's right. I've been listening to it on audiobook, by the way. And
cool.
It's really
Thanks.
good. It's really good, man.
Thanks, brother.
But on that, so I'm curious to bring it back around to a little bit of this. What's really interesting to me is like what a mystic means in life, because I think you're right. Like the conceptions or the things, like we can get sometimes so stuck on that, and so often what I do is just ground myself and just realize, like, this is it. Whatever experience is right here, right now, even in the most painful times, whatever. It's like, this is it. This is it. There is no other thing anywhere else. Idea, concept. Like, this is it.
And a reminder.
As a parent, I know you said you had to take. Yeah, it is. And like, I'm a dad. You know, I have 2 kids, and you know, I work other boring shit or whatever. And so I'm really curious about like what is like the life of Bob, the mystic, like all of this, you know, awareness and this stuff, like how does that express in your life? Like as being the husband, the father, and you, like, what do you do for your day gig, or like how, like what does the life of Bob look like as a mystic?
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a deep question, the practical application. You know, I think spirituality has to be practical. I think it has to be experiential, or it's pretty useless. You know, I think it's fun to read about the concepts, and the concepts are useful because they can prime your mind for an experience. But if they don't help us embody it, then it's really empty stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I think what mystic philosophy helps me with is recognizing the inherent divinity in all beings. You know, how can I appreciate and value, you know, not just myself, not just my loved ones, but, you know, everybody and everything. I think that's really the goal of the mystic, is to see the entire planet as not even just one family. I think that there's a secular, which is good, secular kind of activism around we're all one family. With the mystics, is we're all one mind. So really, living from that place. I don't do it all the time. I'm not, but that's what I'm working on. It's okay. It seems like there's this incremental kind of push towards living in these principles. For me at least, I've noticed that it does work. It hasn't been instantaneous like some Sri Ramana Maharshi or Byron Katie, both of whom I write about, have this kind of awakening moment. Eckhart Tolle had an awakening moment, which is wonderful. And they might have had many incarnations of no progress, who knows. But for me, it's been very one step at a time. And I think the way it manifests is just being more peaceful, being more compassionate, focusing on the present. I have a corporate day job at Meta. I was a starving artist in my 20s, making films about religion, and I didn't realize that nobody wanted to watch slow, boring documentaries about religion directed by a 24-year-old.
I do
at the time. Thank you. You and 5 other people, and me, and but that's okay. I licensed one of them to Gaia, Keenan Within, and I just realized they gave me a check for $5,000, and I was 24, and I was like, this is cool, but I just spent 3 years on this, so I need to find more skills, and so I learned marketing basically. So big tech has come to my city here in Austin, so I learned basically digital marketing is my day job. I also do. I'm proud to say that I'm a part of the mindfulness club at Meta, where we do basically meditations and trainings, and it's all volunteer based. There's no executive leadership. In fact, executives have actually said. So there's some accusations. Just side note from folks that it's called Mindfulness. There's a book on it, and just the idea that corporations are using mindfulness to engender productivity and individualism and be good workers and such. I don't think that's true, because I've been we're really dying to get money for programs. They don't give a damn, and well, they do and they don't. I'll tell you what, it's hard to find the support. And so I like that it's grassroots. I like that we've literally asked very high ups to get involved and help us, and it was not very useful. So it's a bunch of employees. We have regular meditations, and we're just trying to plant seeds of presence and stillness into a company that has about 3 billion users on its websites. So, who knows what we're doing, but
what does that look like?
I think it's just inconceivable.
Yeah. I mean, what is that?
The amount of work that goes into something like this.
So what does that look like for trying to create mindfulness and essentially a lot of these toe dipping into the water of mysticism on a 3 billion user scale? I'm really curious about how and what you do in that world, or where would I see that come up as a user?
Oh, well, you won't see it come up as a user necessarily. What we're trying to do is focus on, I'm also on the sales side, so I have very little to do with what the user sees and does, unless you're getting an ad from one of my clients. So that's my job. But, I'll talk about breaking the veil with you or someone on a podcast, and then I'll jump off and get on a call and talk about how to sell more sunglasses on Instagram. It's a paradoxical, it's a paradoxical existence, but that's okay. Profound and mundane.
Hey, I talk about how people should be able to heal themselves, and you don't need big pharma. And then I go sell people health insurance policies.
That's beautiful.
So I get it.
Yeah, it's what is the Zen Buddhist? Stephen Mitchell's Zen Buddhist teacher was a washing machine service repairman. That was like his total.
Yeah,
he was like,
dude,
the
I love
biggest
that.
master in the world.
The Gospel According to Jesus.
Yeah, he's terrific.
Yeah,
he's great.
Dude, the Gospel According to Jesus was awesome. I'm sorry, we might have a lag here or something. I feel like I'm.
Oh no, you're good.
Cutting you off a couple
You're good.
times,
No, but just to come back, what we're really focused on is, teaching very ambitious tech workers how to meditate, and because I believe that the method is powerful enough to where it'll work. It's what I've seen in my life and with others is like, yoga is a great example. When I first started doing Kriya Yoga, just like very spiritual Yogananda, it's kind of like Kundalini, it's chakra pranayama. I was 22 or something, and I got so, people are going to yoga to do this, a misappropriation, man. It's very judgy, and I still see this viewpoint out there, and so it's nothing new, and it's not going anywhere. It's the antagonism. And what I saw over the years was the little white girl that goes to the gym to do yoga to get fit 3 years later is reading the Bhagavad Gita. It's sometimes, not all the time, but more often than not.
Her pastor's worst nightmare.
Right. Exactly. It does work because the methods, are designed, they're engines, they're vehicles. And so, sometimes I don't say this often publicly, but I'll share it with you, which is like, I'm kind of Trojan horsing spirituality in a sense. Like, I respect all religions. I respect agnostics and atheists. And like, I'm not trying to convert anyone, to be clear, like with our mindfulness practice at work. But we are trying to say, hey, presence is useful. And the more present you are, the more you build in that meditation practice and mindfulness practice, you might be surprised that your value is shifting, or your values becoming more heart-centric, inclusive, and so on. So it's very subtle. I'm posting Thich Nhat Hanh quotes in, workplace community board. I don't, who knows what impact we're making, because it's such a big ship. It's such a massive steam engine. But that's okay. We're planting little seeds here and there, and I'm not going to be here forever. I've been here 5 years already, so maybe a few more. But I'm trying to go full time with this kind of work. So we'll see.
Yeah, totally, man. I mean, that's me too. At the end of the day, in an ethical way, Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the
service based.
Is not selling your soul. So I'm curious with that. So like, and it seems to me that's what so many people who begin to have impact in spiritual spaces do. To a degree, they do Trojan horse in a very kind, thoughtful, mindful way. But I mean, I do think Yogananda, in a way, Trojan horsed the image of Christ. I mean, I believe he believes Jesus was an avatar, but I also think too that he's very aware if he's going to go to the West, you better use an image that people are familiar with. And so whatever it is you're doing, whether you're at Meta or whether you're, it's selling insurance or infiltrating an American system with, yoga and, Kriya Yoga or whatever, like you have to use familiar ways for people to enter. Because that's my thing is to me, especially in the deconstruction, specifically the deconstruction community, it seems that so often people are, and something we talked about a long time ago, there is this punk rock feel to it, and it's this very hurt expression. But like, we are supposed to walk into this wholeness, to this healing. Sozo means healing. Who am I to tell you that, right? Like, it means to become into that unified, reconciled place within, to the garden that's within you. And sometimes I think we create barriers instead of bridges. And my work is to help people have a bridge to enter in, to go to the raft to the other side, right? And what so many people do, they get hung up on, again, just kind of becoming militant or fundamentalist about whatever silver bullet. In my opinion, it's like progressive Christianity is a silver bullet. Fuck no, it's not. I went that route too. You know, like there is no thing that's going to solve all the shit you got going on inside of you.
Yeah, there's.
So my point is, the point is that I want to Trojan horse and invite people into a bridge over to this expanse, not offend them.
Yes,
you know what
beautiful.
I mean?
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of people in deconstruction whom I will not name, and I like some of their stuff, but I definitely have seen some videos where I'm like, oh, you're working through, you know, some real anger at the situation, and again, I mean, there's hypocrisy, there's abuse, there's not good things in the institution of all religions. And that's something I've been clear about.
Totally.
There was a little moment in my book where I described kind of the early days of the yoga groups feeling so like this is the truthiest truth. You know, it was like, oh, this is it kind of thing. And then
dude.
Very dishearteningly, there was a temple in South Austin in Dripping Springs that I would drive past. It was a Hindu temple. There's not too many Hindu temples out here. You know, there's a few, but I would go to this little yoga group at this woman's house. It was really nice. She had an altar. Swamis would come. It was great. But on the way, I would drive past this totally unrelated temple, like a different Hindu temple. And I just thought, oh, that's kind of cool. I went in there once and I wanted to feel something, but I just didn't. You know, there was peacocks walking around, a bunch of Indians. It was cool, but I just didn't. I was like, oh, I want the Shakti. You know, I want some kind of experience. I didn't get it.
Yeah.
So a couple of years later, I read about how the head guru of that temple was sexually abusing girls and women. And he actually, I think he's still on the FBI's most wanted list. He escaped to Mexico. They took him to court and he broke bail or whatever and like made it to Mexico, made his India. He's still at large. The temple was called Barsana Dham. They renamed it. They extinguished his presence of all of it. And so it's a terrible story. But the reason I bring it up is because it was useful for me, you know, in some capacity to say, hey, every religion has the highest heights of humanity and the most barbaric, you know, undeveloped.
I mean, that's non-duality manifesting itself,
exactly.
Right? I mean, there's nowhere that's wholly pure and wholly evil. It is, and if you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you'll find what you need
exactly.
You know, through that, and who knows what karma we're working out, you know? So it's
exactly.
Like we're just attracted to the things, and
and so you know, what I will say though is you know, again, kind of honoring the East, I really do appreciate their inclusivity. I think, you know, there's a story I tell, probably too much, but I can't help it. The Four Blind Men and the Elephant, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which is, you know, a really great illustration of universalism, which is four blind men, an elephant enters this village, and the first blind man goes up to the elephant's trunk and says, oh, this entity is like a snake. And the second blind man goes up to the leg and says, this entity is like a column. And the third blind man goes up to the tusk and says, this entity is like a sword. And they're all arguing over this. And then a person with sight comes along and says, you're all correct, but it's just one aspect. So the tusk is like a sword, but it's just a tusk. The leg is like a column, but it's just the leg. It's all of you guys' interpretation is true, and it's all of them, and it's much more. There's all these different characteristics that you haven't become aware of as well. And so I think that's a really great illustration of religious sectarianism. That's the institution.
Yeah.
That's the wars. That's the violence of people arguing. And, you know, really the mystic says it's all of them and more. And so that's really what that's the role I'm trying to play in a humble way, is to say, you're right, and that's true, and you're welcome to interpret God in this way. But you're wrong when you think that it's the only way. Basically, exclusivity is my only issue.
Yeah. I mean, and you might even have a preferred part of it. You'd be like, man, it's a freaking sick tusk.
Sure,
I'm
exactly.
going with that.
Yeah, I do.
Like,
absolutely.
It's fine. You know,
I have my own teachers and my own books.
We all have that preference.
Exactly. You have to, I think, in some capacity, because all of the different psychodynamic needs of human beings, through modern psychology, we've seen how different we all are, beautifully different and unique. Yeah. And everyone has these different, we're all carrying different stuff. We all have all these different, psycho-emotional needs and so on. And so that's why there's all these paths. Everything is exactly, kind of to get into the Ram Dass-y stuff, like it's all exactly designed for exactly where you are. So just find the one that is perfectly for you. Find the teacher, find the book, find the path, find the method that mirrors your exact needs to undo kind of what you're carrying. May we all find that.
So with that too, and I believe, I love Ram Dass. He was integral for me. It still is, but especially likewise. Everybody goes through their Ram Dass season.
I hope so.
You need to. Not everyone, I guess. More people should. I did.
Likewise.
But he does what I appreciate about Ram Dass and about some of the other. Obviously, Alan Watts didn't really, I think, live long enough for the New Age phenomenon to really set in the 80s and 90s,
right.
But Ram Dass did kind of talk some shit about specifically New Age, or even Raghu Marcus, another guy who I love, who is a white dude with an Indian name. But nonetheless, he was kind of bitching about some New Age bullshit stuff on another podcast the other day. And, where is that? I don't want to say line, because that can be immediately gripped as a sort of dogmatism. But like, how do you sort out that in a sort of like, you want things to come from within you and that resonate with you, that are meant for your incarnation, but you do want to honor the traditions. That's what I think New Age does. That's what they're marked by, is that sometimes they don't fully honor the tradition, the heritage, the lineage, the ways that those wisdoms passed down.
Yeah.
Like,
I think that's an injustice.
Navigate
that. I think the biggest mistake New Age makes is not honoring the lineage, because appropriation, the definition is assuming you're the inventor, basically. So the way to undo the appropriation is to say, this comes from Zen Buddhism, this comes from, Advaita Vedanta, whatever the tradition, this comes from native Apache indigenous spirituality, which I try to do, because I actually have a small part in my book where I kind of explain what New Age is, even though it's a very general term and there's a wide variety. It's pretty enigmatic. It's the culmination of a lot of different paths. It's the culmination of not just the 1900s, but the 1800s actually was already starting to question institutional religion at large. So there was these societies, the Theosophy, Ed Casey, there's a lot that goes into what New Age is. There's a lot of legitimacy, frankly, in quote unquote New Age. But yeah, I think it does. Yeah. The main injustice is exactly what you said, not honoring that. And so it takes some education, I think, from people. And I'm happy to point people to, as within my own knowledge and, limited experience in terms of like what the source of those practices are and methods are. And look, I have to go. I would much rather talk to you for a few more hours, but we'll have to do a part 2.
Yeah, man. I was just about to say, I don't want to keep you for too long. In the part 2, if I can just leave you with this, and I will respect your time here. I want to talk about how your understanding scholarly of Bible things and Yogananda's interpretation, how accurate
Let's
those
do
are, how
it.
those
I
fit
would
together.
love that.
'Cause there's a lot of beef
Oh,
about
I'd love
that.
to. That'd be great.
So,
I look forward to it.
all right, that'll be episode
Awesome.
2,
Thanks,
man.
Luke. I appreciate it, brother.
All right.
Bye.
See you, dude.